It is just after 4 in the afternoon, August 1940, on the south coast of England. A young woman sits in front of a cathode ray screen inside a low concrete hut. She is watching a smear of green light, a shape moving slowly across a grid growing wider. She picks up a telephone and reads out numbers, bearing, height, distance, and a count that keeps climbing. Somewhere over the English Channel, more than 100 German bombers and fighters are forming up, still 40 miles from the coast. 10 minutes later, and 30 miles inland, a squadron of Royal Air Force pilots, some of them barely out of their teens, are already running to their aircraft. They will be airborne, climbing, and in position before the German formation crosses the coastline. To the pilots flying toward them, it will look almost impossible. How could the British already be waiting? That question, how did they already know, sits at the center of one of the most consequential summers in modern history. Britain in 1940 had fewer aircraft, fewer trained pilots, and a smaller industrial base than the power bearing down on it. By every conventional measure, it should not have been able to hold the line, let alone shape the outcome of the war that followed. And yet in the years that came after, Britain would be remembered less for the size of its army than for something harder to see and even harder to explain, an uncanny, almost unfair ability to know what was coming before it arrived. To understand how that was possible, the story has to go back a few months earlier, to the early summer of 1940. France had just fallen. The British Expeditionary Force had been pulled off the beaches at Dunkirk, leaving behind most of its tanks, trucks, and heavy guns. Western Europe, from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees, was now under German control or influence. Britain stood alone, separated from the most powerful military machine in Europe by 21 miles of water at its narrowest point. German planners had already begun sketching an invasion, a plan they called Operation Sea Lion, and its precondition was simple: control of the skies over the Channel and southern England. On paper, that control should not have been difficult to win. The Luftwaffe had more aircraft, more combat-tested pilots fresh from campaigns in Poland, Norway, and France, and a doctrine built around speed and concentration of force. Britain's fighter command, under Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, had a smaller number of Spitfires and Hurricanes, and many of its pilots had only weeks of operational experience. If the war in the air had come down to numbers and experience alone, the outcome would not have been in serious doubt. But Dowding had spent the previous several years building something the Luftwaffe did not fully understand and did not take seriously enough. Along the coast stood a chain of radar stations, chain home, able to detect aircraft forming up over occupied France before they even crossed open water. Their readings were fed by telephone line into filter rooms, where controllers cross-checked them against reports from the Observer Corps on the ground. From there, the information moved to sector stations, where women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force pushed markers across map tables in real time, building a living picture of the battle as it formed. Fighter squadrons could then be scrambled not on guesswork or standing patrol, but on precise, current knowledge of where the enemy was, how many there were, and where they were heading. It was not one invention. It was a system: radar, human observation, telephone lines, and a control room stitched together so that information moved faster than the aircraft themselves. Through July and into August, the Luftwaffe tested that system without fully recognizing what it was fighting. Convoys in the Channel came under attack first. Then, in what the Germans called Adlertag or Eagle Day, the assault turned toward the radar stations and airfields themselves in an effort to blind and ground fighter command before the invasion fleet ever had to sail. For the pilots living through it, the days blurred together. Some flew 4 or 5 sorties before nightfall, climbing, fighting, landing to refuel and rearm, and climbing again. Losses were real, and they were felt. But squadron after squadron kept finding itself already positioned when the German formations arrived, climbing to altitude, sun behind them, in exactly the place the fight would happen. German intelligence, meanwhile, consistently underestimated how many aircraft Britain still had in reserve, and dismissed the coastal towers as a minor nuisance rather than the nervous system of an entire defence. early September, Fighter Command was exhausted. Its airfields cratered, its pool of trained pilots thinning, but it had not broken, and the Luftwaffe could not understand why. Then, in a shift that would change the course of the battle, German bombing turned away from the airfields and radar stations and toward London itself. It gave Fighter Command's shattered ground infrastructure room to recover. Through September and into October, RAF losses stayed within what the system could replace, while German losses did not. By the end of October, the invasion that had once looked inevitable had quietly been shelved. For decades afterward, the story told about that summer centered on the Spitfire and on the courage of what became known as the few, a phrase that has followed those pilots ever since and one they earned in full. But courage alone does not explain why the British always seemed to be in the right place. The deeper answer was the network behind them. An invisible architecture of radar, observation, and control that let a smaller force fight only where it needed to. And that network was only the first half of the answer, because winning the sky over Britain still left another war being fought, one that mattered just as much and stayed hidden for far longer. Britain is an island. In 1940, it depended on ships crossing the Atlantic for food, fuel, and the raw materials of war. German submarines understood this and hunted the convoys in coordinated groups that came to be called wolf packs. Ships were going down faster than Britain could build replacements, and for a stretch of the war, the question of whether Britain could simply keep feeding and supplying itself was as dangerous as any single battle. The answer to that threat did not come from a shipyard or a naval base. It came from a country estate north of London called Bletchley Park, where a mixed group of mathematicians, linguists, chess players and clerks worked in shifts around the clock, trying to break the cipher machine the Germans called Enigma, a device its own operators believed was unbreakable. Among those working on the problem was a young mathematician named Alan Turing, whose ideas helped turn code-breaking from a matter of individual brilliance into something closer to an industrial process. When German naval Enigma traffic began to be read with any regularity, convoys could be quietly rerouted around waiting wolf packs before the U-boats ever made contact. The intelligence produced this way was given a code name, Ultra, and its existence was treated as more sensitive than almost anything else in the war. Most of the officers who acted on it never knew where it truly came from. Cover stories were built to explain sudden convoy changes, a lucky reconnaissance flight, a routine patrol, anything but the truth. That secrecy came at a real and difficult cost. There were moments when acting immediately on ultra-intelligence would have revealed that the cipher was broken, and commanders made the deliberate choice not to act, accepting a loss in the short term to protect a secret that might shorten the entire war. Historians still debate exactly how much time and how many lives that intelligence advantage saved. What is not in serious dispute is that it changed the balance of a war being fought largely out of sight, beneath the surface of the ocean. Put together, the two stories are really one story. In the air, Britain built a system that could see the enemy coming. Beneath the sea, it built one that could read the enemy's own intentions. Neither victory came from having more of anything the eye could count, more planes, more ships, more men. Both came from getting to information first and knowing what to do with it before the enemy realized it had been lost. For years after the war, almost none of this was known outside a small circle. Ultra was not declassified until the 1970s. Veterans who had spent the war rerouting convoys or flying interception patrols went decades without being able to explain, even to their own families, why certain decisions had been made the way they were. An entire hidden layer of the war stayed sealed long after the guns had gone quiet. Go back, one more time, to that operations room on the south coast in August 1940, the young woman watching a shape widen on a screen, the pilots already climbing before the enemy could see them. It looked to the men flying toward them like something close to impossible. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't magic. It was people, working in shifts, turning fragments of information into decisions fast enough to matter. That, in the end, is what dominance meant in 1940 and in the years that followed. Not the loudest force in the field, but the one that saw first and understood what it was seeing before anyone else did.